Transactional freedom is absolutely critical for freedom of speech to exist in America. Welcome to Freedom Alive. The Biden administration issued an executive order that's a plan to take control of the global monetary system using central banking digital currency, known as CBDC. On this episode of Freedom Alive, Stephanie Bowen, a public policy analyst and copywriter with Liberty Counsel, joins us to explain why this digital currency can be a serious threat to our freedom. I'm blessed to again be joined by our co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, in 2022, we saw the Canadian government seize the bank accounts of truck drivers who peacefully protested the COVID lockdowns. The government used facial recognition systems and other intrusive technologies to identify the truckers. They got their license plates and then they froze their bank accounts. So they couldn't get diesel for their trucks. They couldn't buy food for their families. They couldn't pay their mortgages. It's concerning that we could be just a few steps away from experiencing that kind of control scenario over our money.
Yeah, the ultimate form of control is being able to control your spending and your income. And a central bank digital currency, how that's different from what we do typically with our credit cards or with cryptocurrency, is it is a currency that is totally digital, and it is a central bank, so it's under the federal government's central bank. So every transaction goes through that centralized federal bank, and consequently, that central federal bank has the ability to control, to freeze your assets, to even make your assets more valuable or less valuable by taking a dollar and adding, say, for example, 25 cents to your dollar, or taking 25 cents off of your dollar by just simply changing the value of your money from a digital perspective. So it is an ultimate form of control, and it's an ultimate form of veto power over every single transaction. So if the government doesn't want you to transact some kind of action, they don't want you to purchase, for example, too much fuel on a monthly basis. They've limited you to how much you can consume per month. Then when you reach that limit, when you go to the gas pump, your credit card won't work beyond that amount. So there's all kinds of ways that this is a total ultimate control.
A very real threat to all of us. We cannot wait to bring it to you, but our Freedom Alert is next.
Supreme Court Justice warns about discriminating against religious beliefs. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear a case where potential jurors were dismissed from hearing a trial due to their biblical beliefs on homosexuality. But Justice Samuel Alito issued a 5-page warning that this discrimination poses a danger to religious freedom. In his statement, he wrote, the lower court concluded that the jurors had been dismissed not on the basis of their religious status, but on the basis of their religious beliefs. And this distinction, it said, made all the difference because, in its view, while dismissals based on a juror's status as Christians must comport with strict scrutiny, dismissals based on a juror's views need not. Justice Alito anticipated a situation like this in his dissenting opinion in 2015, the Obergefell so-called same-sex marriage opinion regarding marriage. Religious discrimination must end.
Up next, Matt's interview with Stephanie Bowen.
I want to welcome Stephanie Bowen. She is a public policy analyst and copywriter for Liberty Counsel, and she is an expert on many things. She's done an incredible amount of research on a central bank digital currency. What is a central bank digital currency? We're going to be talking about it, explaining what this is, and how much of a threat is it really, and what you can do about it. So welcome to Freedom Alive, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's great to be here.
Stephanie, I know you have a lot of background in this area. You've done a lot of research, an incredible amount of investigation with regards to not only the financial markets, but in particular, a central bank digital currency. So let's begin by addressing some basics for those who are not familiar with CBDCs. How is a central bank digital currency different than, say, a credit card transaction, because we use our plastic and that's digitized? And then how is it different than what we consider or what we know about of cryptocurrencies? Let's begin with both of those. set the groundwork for what a central bank digital currency is, how it may be similar in some cases, how it may be significantly different in other cases.
Sure. So a central bank digital currency is a digital programmable currency created by central bankers and governments. What it does is it makes the federal government, in our case here in the United States, as well as in China and other places, it makes the government and the central bank of that government your direct banker, which means instead of having a bank account at Bank of America, for instance, and using your debit card to swipe and pay in money like that, you're actually using a government interface. Your bank account is held, operated, and controlled by the government and the central bank behind it. That's the biggest thing to understand. The other thing is that CBDCs are designed to replace cold, hard cash money. There will be no more dollars, no more pennies, no more dimes in their corners. And there will also be no more anonymous transactions. So every time you pay your babysitter $20, you're going to have to use a CBDC to pay them rather than just handing them a $20 bill. It sounds fairly minor and innocuous, right? But there are actually significant problems associated with this, not the least of which is the ability for the federal government to control your every move by controlling every single cent you make, spend, or manage to save.
So, like a debit card, for example, or a credit card, while that might be an electronic transaction, there's actual choices involved, and you have a choice to have your debit card or your credit card at this bank or that bank. So you have these private banks that's not a government-controlled bank. And if the government wants to find out whether there's suspicious activity going on in your account, they'll need to get a subpoena to find out what's happening with regards to your individual expenditures. Otherwise, they don't know every single transaction. And certainly they wouldn't know any transaction that you do by cash when you pay a tip at a restaurant, or when you pay cash, like you said, to someone else. The government's not going to know that you have made that transaction. But in this particular case, if you have a central bank, and part of the name is central bank digital currency. So first of all, it's a central bank. And so you're not going to select your bank. No more private banks. All the private banks are going to be gone. And what you're saying is you've got a centralized government-run bank, and every single transaction will go through that centralized government-run bank.
That's absolutely right. And where this gets really concerning is the government's ability to control that. So right now, you can go down to your local banker, and many small community banks still do this. You can sit down with your banker and say, hey, I need a loan for my business, or I need to do this or that. And your ability to receive that loan is basically based on your honor, right? Your credit score and things like that. Unfortunately, what we're seeing as CBDCs get executed throughout the world, like in China, suddenly there's no banker around the corner to go talk to. You've got to talk to the federal government. And if the administration in place decides that you're not green enough, or that you are not LGBTQ friendly enough, or whatever the policies are that administration is pushing, they simply won't give you the loan. There are a number of other difficulties involved in this as well, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. But it's all about government control and their ability to force their will on you in dictating how you're allowed to spend and save your money.
So it's not only that you may not get your loan, certainly, but you may not even have a bank account. And in fact, recently, through public records request, FOIA request, it's been learned that the FBI and other government agencies under the Biden administration have been approaching banks with the list from the Southern Poverty Law Center, stating that any entity, any organization that's on this list, this bank should shut down and not have any dealings with that entity. And some of those organizations are pro-family organizations, including Liberty Counsel, for example, Alliance Defending Freedom, Family Research Council, and many other pro-family religious freedom organizations are on that bogus SPLC list. So the government's already trying to shut down the private banks, but it's up to the banks to actually follow through and do that. We have not had that happen to Liberty Counsel, but I do know other organizations to which it has occurred. But if the banks are not private run, and if the government, in this case, the FBI, just goes to another branch of the government and says, shut down this account, that account's shut down.
You're absolutely right. And we actually saw shades of this during the Obama administration. Guns and ammunition are legal for sale. We have the Second Amendment protecting us. But what the Obama administration did is they went to the banks, just similar to this incident, and said, hey, we don't think you should really be banking those terrible, terrible gun shops anymore. And these gun shops lost their ability to take credit cards. They lost their bank accounts. Now, thank God, we still had and still have at this time a free market where many of these folks were able to find get new bank accounts at other banks that refused to participate with Obama's ideal. However, many did not. If we have a CBDC style implementation that this government wants, there's no free market to look to if you get cut off. If you don't appease the powers that be in Washington, D.C., there won't be a bank account. There won't be the ability to take electronic payments. You'll simply be shut down, just like many of the gun shops were back in the Obama administration.
So we talked about everything would go through the central banking system of the federal government, but let's also talk about digital currency. So everything would be digitized and would be zeros and ones. And consequently, there are significant implications to that. Compare this central bank digital currency, for example, to a cryptocurrency. What's the difference? What's the similarities?
Well, realistically, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in specific, were designed specifically to avoid this kind of onerous tyranny that we're already seeing in the banking systems. A group, well, nobody's quite sure if it's a group or a person, but Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin in 2008 to create a true free market currency that cannot be controlled by any government or any central bank. He designed it with two keys to it. One, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are permissionless, meaning you don't need anyone's permission to use this money. Just like if you had a fistful of dollars, you don't need the government's permission to spend those dollars. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are created the same way. Second of all, cryptocurrencies are decentralized, meaning that there's no authority that's controlling the cryptocurrency. Those cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin cannot be seized, manipulated, sanctioned, or frozen by central bank government authorities. So they eliminate the possibility of the US government or the communist Chinese government coming in and seizing and holding and stealing your funds from you. It's the ultimate freedom exercise. And because Bitcoin started taking off so rapidly, this is why these governments are countering with CBDCs, because CBDCs are the exact opposite of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. You need the government's permission to use that money, and the government controls that money and can seize back control of that money at any time. CBDCs are literally the polar opposite of freedom-giving Bitcoin cryptocurrency.
So in one sense, they're the same in that they're digitized, but in the other sense, and this is the significant difference, they are polar opposite because instead of being privatized outside of the government, it is the government, and the government controls everything, and everything goes through a centralized system. Well, what could possibly go wrong with something like that? Talk about what this can do to, say, for example, somebody who has a bank account, say of $1,000 in your checking or your savings account. You got $1,000, you think you have $1,000 there, but now some government entity decides that because of equity, they want to shift certain money to certain other categories of people, be it reparations or be it some other kind of subsidized social support system. What could happen to that $1,000 that you think you have in your savings or checking account? What could the government do to it?
They just take it back, right? I mean, it's their money. They're holding the controls. So with the push of a button, they can prevent you from using your own money for whatever reason. They can use it for things like you mentioned in wealth redistribution, which is something we hear all the time from the progressives in Congress, right? You can use it for those things, but you can also use it for a number of other things. For instance, governments can implement negative interest rates. This is something that is being discussed in Sweden and the European Union right now, that if they feel that people are saving too much money, in other words, you're hoarding and not sharing with the rest of the community, they can set negative interest rates, which actually charge you for having money in your bank account, in your CBDC account, and reduce that level. But there are other smaller things that they can do as well, right? So where they're already doing this in communist China, for instance. If the CCP feels that a person has used too much healthcare services or products during that year or that month, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your CBDC account. They just prevent you from using it on healthcare, right? Because you've used more than your fair share. The same is true for gasoline. If the CCP feels that you've used too much gas this month, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your account. You just simply don't get to buy gas with it. They're also using it to interrupt travel and people's ability to buy homes and property and things like that. It's really onerous. But again, the CCP is not the only place doing this. Like I said, Sweden is looking at negative interest rates. The European Union is looking at similar measures to prevent people from saving too much money. You know, it reminds me of in the Bible, of course, the borrower is always slave to the lender, right? Your savings are your ability to be free. If there is a crisis, a family crisis, a national crisis, anything like that, your savings and what you've put away for a rainy day are meant to protect you. Now these governments are trying to eliminate your ability to save your hard-earned income. And that is because they want to keep you slave to the government and the person who gave you the money.
That's amazing that if you have money in your checking or savings account, for example, and you would like to gain interest on it. In fact, if the government says, we want to have more liquidity in the markets, perhaps there's an election coming up and the economy is not doing so good, but you now want to encourage people to actually spend money to boost the economy so that you have an upcoming election that looks maybe favorable for the incumbent that's in office. Now they can encourage you to do that, but under a central bank digital currency, they can force you to spend your money. And if you don't spend your money, then that money in your account, as you mentioned, can go into a negative interest rate. So instead of gaining 3 to 5%, for example, whatever it might be, on the money that's there, you're actually losing a certain percentage every single day that the money is there over a certain amount. And so consequently, you're forced to go out and spend it on something. Now, when you want to spend it, you can only spend it on certain things because under the Biden administration, there is this big effort to purchase green. And consequently, there is an inertia for you to purchase and an incentive to purchase electric vehicles or some other kind of electric motorized transportation vehicle. So when you go to the pump and you pump your gas, even though maybe you have the money to spend, when you pump the gas, you put in your card, only $5 comes out. Maybe nothing comes out because that month you've already reached your gasoline quota. You've already reached your mileage quota or other kinds of things that you should spend based upon the government's desire or that they don't want you to spend based upon the government's prohibition. All of that is within the government's ability under a central bank digital currency. So with that background, and it is a stunning situation, and it's not hypothetical because obviously you mentioned it's not only in communist China, and we can talk a little bit about some of the examples there, but it's also in other nations as well. The EU, the World Health Organization, they're all talking about this central bank digital currency because it is the ultimate form of control. What has Joe Biden done so far towards these efforts?
Well, actually, Joe Biden earlier this year last year passed an executive order number 14067, officially entitled the Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets. Essentially, it's an executive order ordering the Fed, the Federal Reserve, to begin investigating, is how the executive order reads, central bank digital currencies. Well, the Fed has gone long past the investigation stage. They actually started creating and coding this new currency. In fact, the Boston Fed and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, completed what they called Project Hamilton on December 22nd of 2022. I find it curious, by the way, that they named it for Alexander Hamilton. He actually proposed the first national bank as a means of ensuring federal control of post-revolutionary states by buying up those states' war debt. right? So that's interesting. But anyway, they completed the testing on December 22nd, 2022. They've revealed some, MIT feels there were a couple of flaws in it, but other than that, the majority of the Fed is indicating that it's ready to go as soon as Joe Biden pulls the trigger. The one saving grace we have is we do have a couple of Fed chairs that have publicly spoken about the need for Congress to authorize them to issue such a thing. So that's good news that there's a tiny bit of resistance at the Fed to just blindly following Biden's marching orders down this road to the CBDC. But it's really going to be incumbent on folks like you, Matt, getting the word out to the people, and the people tirelessly haranguing their legislators and lawmakers to insist that we do not want this awful idea for fiat money and governmental control of our prosperity.
We need people to go to lc.org/CBDC, lc.org/CBDC. There's a lot of information there. The bills that are pending in Congress are mentioned there. We also have, as you have uncovered, Stephanie, information that the various federal agencies have already begun to hire people to put them in place to begin to execute for a central bank digital currency. But in addition to what's happening here in the United States, we have this going on globally as well. China's behind it. Others are behind it. And I think, Stephanie, I believe you probably would agree with this. They're behind it because it would remove the United States dollar from the basis of the U.S. World trading dollar, the world trading currency, and thus weaken the power of the United States of America.
You're absolutely right, Matt. So there's actually two tracks for a CBDC. One is a retail CBDC, which you and I have been discussing so far, which really deals with the individual person and the average Joe down the street. There's also something called a wholesale CBDC. A wholesale CBDC is the same thing. And the way they're selling it is that it's meant to make faster, instant international payment transactions. So as an example, several months ago, I went to buy some skincare from a Croatian company. Well, I can't just use my credit card online to buy skincare in Croatia from the United States. I had to send a payment. It had to go through the Federal Reserve SWIFT system. It took 5 days. It's kind of ridiculous. I had to pay a fee. The bankers get to take a cut, not just my local bank, but also the Fed gets to take a cut before they send it overseas. It takes 5 days. Absolutely ridiculous. Had the organization that I was dealing with accepted Bitcoin, bing, they'd have had my payment instantly, right? But they didn't. So that's the situation. The wholesale CBDC is being billed as though we have a problem in getting payments out. And to some extent we do, as in my case, it took 5 days. We already have a remedy for it, though, in things like Bitcoin. So the CBDC is being pushed for a wholesale level. It's really the same thing on a grander scale for international payments. It's still about government control. And it's also, you hit it right on the head. If you're using a CBDC, you don't have to worry about whether it's in the US dollar or not. And I believe this is all designed to take the US dollar out of the market basket currency and stop the US dollar from being the most commonly used currency in the world, further negating the United States' power and influence across the globe.
So in terms of what we can do, talk about what we can do in the last minute of our program. What should we do and where can we go?
Sure, absolutely. So again, like you mentioned, if you go to lc.org/CBDC, there are actually two very important bills that we're working on, as well as the third one. They're sponsored by Representative Emmer as well as Senator Ted Cruz. They're doing an excellent job keeping abreast of this situation. They prevent Joe Biden or any other implementation from ramming this CBDC down our throat, right? But the other thing they do too, Senator Ted Cruz went a step further, and I'm really glad he did, is he also created a bill to help protect the cryptocurrency industry from people like Joe Biden and other tyrants who would like to see it eliminated because they don't like the freedom and the free market nature of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So please go to the website, fax the congressman, educate yourself. There's a lot more details there. Some of them are kind of nerdy and boring, but this is your money. So educate yourself, fax Congress, and heck, give your congressman a call. Call the local office, call the DC office. You pay their salary. And they are your employee. So take the time to educate them about what you, as their boss, wants them to do. And in this case, it's get rid of CBDCs and get your hands off of freedom-loving currencies like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Well, Stephanie Bowen is our guest, public policy analyst and copywriter for Liberty Counsel. Thank you for joining us. And again, that website that Stephanie mentioned is lc.org/CBDC, lc.org/CBDC.
Matt, it seems surreal that here we are again talking about this digital currency issue, but it's very real. And in fact, the Biden administration has an executive order that's in place.
Yeah, it is, and it's very much a serious threat, and it is combining not only currency, but also with the WHO, the World Health Organization, the European Union, and others are combining that with other kinds of medical data, like digital health, vaccine, passports, and so forth. Communist China already did that. They combined their central bank digital currency, and then when COVID happened, then they combined on their electronic, cell phone transmission, they combined digital information about health, whether you were vaxxed or not vaxxed. So that really ultimately boils down to ultimate control. We see in, for example, the book of Revelation where it talks about a time coming when you won't be able to buy or sell. And I know when I read that many, many years ago when I was much younger, I wondered, how could that happen? How is it that you wouldn't be able to buy or sell? But it's pretty obvious that it's easy to do now with this central bank digital currency, or with the centrality of digital information, where just with a flip of a switch, you can either be able to buy, or you won't be able to buy, or you won't be able to sell.
This is very real. This is a very serious threat. It is upon us. And as both Stephanie and Matt discussed in this program, the time for us to act is now. We must reach out and voice our concerns to stop this momentum in its tracks before this becomes reality, which would be, again, surreal. In closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.